be again facilitated by Dr. Stryker. So let's go for it tonight.
Okay. Oh, am I still wired, wireless? I'm okay?
But that's only for the record, for the video, so you need this.
Okay. Well, this is an entrepreneurial workshop, which means this is an opportunity to test out ideas that you learn here at the workshop. So even though we'd like you to have a wonderful, brilliant idea to pitch, we realize that ideas take time to germinate, take time to refine, and so we really want to stress that this is a workshop where you will just be familiar with the tools for generating the ideas. So don't be worried that you may not have the greatest idea from this workshop, but what we hope you'll have is an understanding of the process for generating ideas. So here's our agenda today. We're going to review the need for entrepreneurship. We'll hear from our guest speaker, Enzo NJoo. We'll talk about critical factors for starting a new enterprise, managing the entrepreneurial organization, personal, environmental, and sociological factors that impact your idea. Very important. Ideas generally don't get created in a vacuum. In this particular environment, this is somewhat of a vacuum because we're asking you to look outside of the school to come up with ideas. Generally, ideas happen on the go. So perhaps you're involved in a business and you need some sort of tool that's not out there. That would create a need for an entrepreneurial idea. But in this situation, we're going to ask you to think creatively and imaginatively and see if you can come up with a need or identify an opportunity. Not your final idea or opportunity, but just something that we can use to utilize these techniques and models. We'll talk about the importance of the founding team. So whoever you work with on your idea is very important to the idea because they're the ones that will give feedback and give substance to the idea that you have germinated. Then we're going to talk about the models that we used in the past, the empathy model. The empathy model is a very important model in entrepreneurship because it identifies what you are thinking and what the customer is thinking. Most important in business is what the customer is thinking because that's who we are pitching our product or service to. And in order to know what the customer is thinking, you really have to empathize with that particular market. So if you are trying to design a toy for a 5-year-old, you don't want to have the perspective as an adult, you really want to have a perspective as a child. And so in a lot of workshops, when they're looking at new toys and new designs, adults are crawling on the floor and engaged in play as if they are a child. Very important to empathize. We're going to use the Canvas business model, the one-page model that allows you to lay out your ideas on one page. Very helpful because really in the early stages of identifying an idea or opportunity, solving a problem, there's a lot of thoughts that come through one's head. And if we can organize it in a one-page model, it's very interesting. It'll be very useful to see how the customer connects to the value proposition and to all the other aspects in the business model. And then finally, I'll go through the sample pitch deck. So we're going to use this template here in this workshop so you can get an experience of what ideas you are going to need to transmit to your audience. So we don't expect you to be getting funding next week, but rather organize your ideas as if you were proposing to receive funding. So today our speaker is going to talk about crowdfunding. And some of these ways that you organize your idea in the pitch deck can be used for the crowdfunding platform. So entrepreneurship, as Vivian suggested, is about identifying an opportunity and creating an organization to execute that idea or opportunity. This whole idea of entrepreneurship is an idea that originated in the 1920s from an Austrian who came in to the United States and decided that existing systems need disruption in order to grow and in order to change. And this is really the basic tenets of entrepreneurship: change, disrupting an existing system or identifying a replacing system. So we talked about why in particular there's a need for entrepreneurship, because a lot of times we talked about the road to success is not just by getting a degree and joining a corporation. Corporations are changing. They're not the source of employment these days. And so that the corporate ladder is really a complex maze. So we are suggesting that those who want to get on board with the new opportunities in the jobs consider entrepreneurship for independence, achievement, recognition, and confidence. Businesses in the United States, small businesses take all of the population. 99.9% of the small businesses in the U.S. Are employers with 500 or fewer people, and most of the source of income for individuals in the U.S. are private businesses. So what are the influences on entrepreneurship? Why, when, or where should you jump into the entrepreneurial process? Well, it just so happens at this point in time, as I mentioned to Enzo, we're really at an interesting place in history where research and development are providing enormous opportunities. So there's other opportunities for launching on platforms such as Indiegogo, but there's other influences that one has to really be aware of when choosing to launch a business. The government influence on entrepreneurship is very important. So if you were to launch a business in China, if you were to launch a business in Spain, there are different influences on your business based on the climate of that government. Very important to be aware of it. And the people, the kind of people that you have involved in launching your idea, very critical, and your customer base has to be correctly identified. So if we're launching such Indiegogo in some place like the South or Missouri, where not as many people are interested in IT and high tech, we may have a different response initially. So initially when you launch a business, you want to make sure the environment in which you launch is really in line with your product or service. And then later, after it goes viral and people start to embrace your idea, then it can migrate to other locales. So these are ideas that you want to be aware of on how shifting influences affect entrepreneurship. So with that in mind, I'd like to now introduce Enzo NJoo, and he will talk a little bit about Indiegogo and where it started, where it is, and where it's going, and where it can go for you. So let's have a welcome to Enzo. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to check, can everybody hear me without the mic? Great, because I think there's an issue with the double mics going on, so I think we're just going to go with no handheld mic. Excellent. How's everybody doing today? Before we get started, I just wanted to thank Susan and Community College of San Francisco for letting me be here. I started my career at De Anza Community College in Cupertino, went to a bunch of these webinars, and I'm just glad to see that you guys all have access to something like this. Credit for what I'm about to tell you today actually comes from you folks, the entrepreneurs themselves, because you are the one who is teaching me about how to run companies and how to build big businesses. Sound good? Excellent. So what I'm hoping for you guys to get out of today is to better understand a general framework of what it looks like to bring your idea all the way into the marketplace. And so the framework that I have outlined here starts by defining your goals. And no goal is a bad goal, and I spoke to one gentleman earlier and came up with one of our first goals, which is to sell fermented beef. So as an entrepreneur, you are trying to sell fermented beef. Anybody else? Any ideas? Raise your hand. Any other ideas? Come on, there can't be just one idea. Come on. Yeah?
Environmentally friendly balloons.
Balloons. Environmentally friendly balloons. Okay, we'll start with those two.
Lids.
Sorry?
Self-dissolving straws and lids.
Self-dissolving lids. Oh, that's a great one. So these are all really great ideas. And as an entrepreneur, your goal is to bring each of these into the market, correct? We are in agreement with that. So the other aspect of the goal that you should be thinking about is that empathy aspect, right? What are the goals of the consumer of your product? So let's start with this one. If I'm a consumer and I buy the fermented beef, my goal is to actually eat it, right? So let's see here. Consumer goal is to eat it. How about the friendly balloons to go to a party and actually get to use it, right? Consume party balloons. And then self-dissolving lids. Your goal is probably also to save the environment as well by using it. I'm going to add two other things here onto the consumer goals because it's not just to consume the product, but for them, specifically with regards to crowdfunding, they also want to feel exclusive. So exclusivity is very important. And then beyond the consumer goals, there are two other goals that I want you to think about. One of them is the journalist's goal, if you do start talking about your idea to media. And then the other one is the investor's goals. What is the goal for the investor who is investing in your company? Obviously to make more money, but what kind of proof of concept do you need to provide to get there? And we'll get to that at the very end. So those are the goals. Now, let's erase this because we don't have that much room. Keep those in mind as we talk about the asset development down here. The next part is you have to think about what you're able to sell. So let's just go with one example here, the fermented beef. So it's the actual product itself. But any other ideas? If you are fermented beef entrepreneurs, what else can you sell to your consumers? How about a cookbook, right? Recipe book. Any other ideas?
Fermented vegetables.
Fermented vegetables, sure. So that's the second step, is to define what you are able to sell. And as you define what you are able to sell, in this case, it's usually pretty safe to be able to ship all of this around the world. There will be other things that are location-based. For example, if you're selling a product at a restaurant, you have to actually get the community within that locale to contribute towards your campaign and your idea. And if what you're selling is location-based, that's inherently going to limit your audience because it's not as large. So anytime you're trying to sell a product, especially if the main product is location-based, location ideas, try to think of other ideas that are going to have a wider audience, something that you can ship all over the world, right? Like a recipe book. Food, you might not be able to ship all around the world unless you have FDA approval. So think of something that has a bigger audience so that you can bring in the largest amount of audience into your idea. Okay? So once you determine what you're selling, we want to create a rough timeline of bringing this product into the market. So first, you have to decide when do you want your consumers to get the product. That's the delivery date, right? Delivery is at the end. And then what comes before delivery? Manufacture. You have to make it. Before you manufacture, you need to fundraise. You need to raise the money to make it. And this is where crowdfunding comes in. So how many of you are familiar with the crowdfunding concept? OK, so most of you are. Should I explain it? It's essentially a way for you to raise funding through a community where you essentially present your idea, typically through a product video, and you offer those ideas, those products ahead of time for them to buy into, for them to eventually get in the future time delivered to them. So how do you do crowdfunding? Before you even think about raising funding on a campaign, there are 5 elements that you need to think about. Those five elements are community building, video, I should also put photo here, creative asset production, public relations, talking to the media, advertising, and then finally at the very end, you're actually creating the Indiegogo campaign itself. So the community building aspect of this is probably the #1 indicator of any successful crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo. And what I mean by community is an email list that you want to build. So how do you start building an email list? The 2 most popular ways to do that is through building a landing page where you can capture those emails, and then building your social media platforms. On Indiegogo, the 2 highest converting social media platforms are Instagram and Facebook. So you want to start by building those pages. As you build those pages, you want to create content, right? You want to post your idea, tease out your idea on social media, and this is all before you actually start fundraising your funds. Think of it as if it was a sort of sandbox for you to test your assumptions. You're putting out your idea for fermented beef. Perhaps you come out with a barbecue flavor at first. You post it up there, and then you see some comments. Well, wouldn't it be nice to have some sweet chili lime fermented beef jerky or some chipotle flavored? So these are some of the things that you can learn through this community building aspect. This is really important because this community is going to be your foundational community that you're going to turn back to a second and third time when you decide to launch a second product, the vegetable, the fermented vegetable, or other flavors, so on and so forth. So community building, it's really important. On Indiegogo, you can actually build a landing page where you can capture those emails. And when you do build those emails, I want you to think about back to the goals of the consumers themselves. The second goal of the consumer is to feel exclusive. So the #1 reason why they will give you an email address for your idea is because they feel like they're going to be the first to know when you launch the campaign and the product, and they're also going to get the biggest discount. So those are the 2 reasons of how you can get an email address from someone on social media. So you get the email address, and ideally, in the weeks before you launch the campaign, you send them emails that, hey, we're about to launch. Please tell your friends, tell your family members. You'll get the biggest discount out of anybody. So that's the community building aspect. This typically takes the longest time. So if you have a really good idea already that you want to test out with your community, I suggest you start building that tomorrow, because that typically takes the longest. And continue to nurture that one too as well. The second part is video and photography. you want to produce around a 90-second to 2-minute video for your product launch. You want it to be very concise, and you want it to bridge the gap between the consumer and what you want the product to let that consumer do. A good example of this is Merrell, a hiking shoe company. They launched a campaign on Indiegogo, and when you look at their video, it wasn't really telling about the feature set of the hiking shoes. It was actually showing an individual hiking a mountain, right? So that's the kind of emotional connection you want to bridge when you create that video, is what is your product going to enable that consumer to do? And go back to the goals of the consumer when you're thinking about producing that video. Any questions so far? Cool. All right. So PR. I have a little bit of experience here. I worked at a small PR agency pitching a lot of tech journalists for about 3 years. And each tech journalist have a different goal, right? So there might be a tech journalist from TechCrunch that writes about robotics. There might be a business journalist from Bloomberg that talks about the business side of the company. So when you are speaking to the media and you're telling your idea to them, you have to do research as to what the actual media journalist's goals are for talking to you. And they all have a different intention. And when you create your pitch, each one of those pitches has to be personalized to each individual. So say I'm pitching Anthony Ha, who's a TechCrunch writer, and he covers entrepreneurship. I would go along the lines of saying, hey, Anthony, I saw that you wrote a recent story about Skip, the scooter company that launched in San Francisco. I'm coming out with a rival company that's going to have a cheaper rate that has more mileage on those scooters. I think you'd be interested in covering my story. The more personalized it is, the more relative it is to the actual audience recipient of that pitch, the more likely you are going to get their attention. Same goes to investors, probably. So that's PR. Typically, PR, you should reach out to them around 2 months before you launch the campaign, because it takes about a couple of weeks to get their attention, and then they take around half a month to actually write the article. With regards to video, it also takes about 2 months, because the video producer needs to learn about your product, learn the space, figure out what your competitive differences are, all throughout the first month, write the script, finalize it, and then during the second month, they usually produce the video. And they go through multiple different iterations, usually. Cool. So the fourth element is advertising. So with ads, you typically want to, in an ideal world, you do what's called A/B testing. And that's a way for you to essentially optimize your ads based on the ideas that you created here, what you're selling. So what is A/B testing? A/B testing would be similar if we go back to the fermented beef example. It would be like putting an ad for the barbecue version and then putting an ad for the Chipotle version and seeing which one of those ads is actually giving you more emails, right? So if you know that the Chipotle one is giving you more emails, you're going to run more Chipotle ads than barbecue ads. And so that's A/B testing, and you want to optimize those conversion rates before you launch the campaign itself. Because if you do have it optimized, you save a lot of money when you start raising funding, and you can just invest more money knowing that they will all return into sales. The last part is actually the campaign building itself. And this is where all of the elements that you've been working on comes into play. You are listing all your perks, what it is you're trying to sell. You are also presenting your video, your photography. If you've gotten some media mentions, it's really good to provide quotes from the media as a third-party validator. If you are a new brand going into the market, you want those third validators that come from the media or testimonials that come from your consumers themselves. So one example that we learned from launching a motorbike called Onyx, which I'll show you in a little bit, was that when we started showing all of the video on social, we saw a lot of comments of people wanting to test ride it. So we spoke to the entrepreneur. He's based in the dog patch here. And he went out there and did a one-night test ride for his new electric motorbike. And everybody raved about it, right? He got riders on camera just grinning across their faces, raving about it, cannot wait to purchase the product. That's the kind of testimonial that you want on your ideas. You want the major food critic from Savour magazine to try your fermented beef and go wild about it. Everybody needs to try it, right? So that all goes into the campaign. Typically, you can run a campaign for 30 to 60 days on Indiegogo, and we will also support you through our promotional channels. That involves our newsletter, which goes out to millions of previous backers, our social media channels, as well as our Indiegogo website itself. So once you're done with the crowdfunding phase, there are also continuation services such as the Indiegogo In Demand and the Indiegogo Marketplace. Indiegogo In Demand is a place where you can continue to sell your product up to the point that you ship it. And then Indiegogo Marketplace is essentially an e-commerce marketplace where you can just sell your product without a funding bar. And eventually, if you want to have your product in big box stores, we have more connections around the tech market and not as much around the food industry. But if you want to get into Best Buy or Target Open House, those are some referrals that we can make eventually. So that just about highlights what the entrepreneurial journey looks like in the crowdfunding process. Are there any questions? Sure.
How robust is the marketplace at Indiegogo?
Marketplace in Indiegogo is fairly robust. I would say that we focus more on our crowdfunding and in-demand platforms because there are so many different e-commerce platforms out there. So typically when an entrepreneur gets to that level, they look to different channels to combine all sales from them. Yeah.
What happens if you're just trying to create a service rather than an item?
Yes.
Is it the same process or is it a little bit different?
What kind of service?
It's like you're creating a destination and a location where people would like to go. So that's a little bit different.
So a destination, what is the service that you're providing?
It's going to be a place, so it's going to be a vineyard with a hotel and restaurant.
So it's a location, a vacation location that you're building somewhere. Yes. Okay. So your goal is to get people to go to that vacation spot. What can you sell? Tickets? Probably? To go to a vacation? Reservations? Reservations? Okay. Can you create a really cool package for them instead of just staying there? Can you create like an activity package?
Yes.
Right, activity packages, those are like the pluses, activities. What else? Any other ideas? Anybody else? We're helping each other out. Yeah, go ahead. Meals provided, meals. Cool. Overnight experience, okay. One that I'd like to add here is travel. How do you even get there to location? So this is your perks. This is what you would be selling on your campaign. Now, I added this because you need, when it's location-based like this, you're going to have an inherently smaller community and audience because you're asking your consumer to travel somewhere to enjoy your idea, to enjoy your product, your location. And so having travel to location is important because that opens up the opportunity for essentially anyone in the world to get to that location, right? Now, the top part there is you need to think about the timeline here, about when that person gets to enjoy that perk. So with physical products, consumers are typically okay with waiting up to 6 months to get their product delivered. With experiential things like this, it has to be realistic, right? If you are building an entire island, of course they're willing to wait 1-2 years for you to actually build it and for them to be able to go. But more often than not, they want to get it back quickly. So you have to think about how long it'll take you to create this, and then when you'll be able to offer it, so that that timing is much shorter instead of the whole 6 months. You still have to create a video. You still have to talk to media. You still have to build your community as well. Almost everything goes the same. It's just a different type of mechanic. The page looks a little bit different. Yeah. Yes?
Any advice or tip for a product that will benefit social cause, like, let's say, communities around the world, low-income communities?
Yeah, we have a lot of really, really great nonprofit campaigns on our platform. So those are considered social good campaigns. And those are a little bit different than this because the perks that you're offering is not really something that the consumer is actually going to be able to enjoy. Is what the consumer is helping that nonprofit do, right? What was the nonprofit and social good?
Not a nonprofit, it's a for-profit that has a component to help another,
Oh, yes.
in other.
Absolutely. So let's bring in the example of Tom Shoes. Everybody knows about Tom Shoes? Tom Shoes is a company that sells a pair of shoes to consumers, and every shoe that they sell, they contribute another shoe to those in need somewhere in the world. Cotopaxi, another apparel company, also did a similar campaign on Indiegogo. I think theirs were socks. So buy one sock, we give one sock away to somebody in need. And that's really great. I think a lot of the community on Indiegogo are very responsive to social good campaigns. But sorry to be a little selfish here, if there is a for-profit component to it, the major part of the campaign needs to focus on that for-profit part. Because they're contributing more because they want that sock. But it's nice that if they are buying a sock, you're giving them another sock to somebody else. That's like the extra icing on the cake for them. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Cool. Anybody else? If there are no other questions, I'd like to show some examples really quickly before we end.
Yes.
Awesome.
So if you remember that slide I projected just before our speaker started, we're in a very unique position right now in terms of our timing, in that we have a platform such as Indiegogo to help launch our business. Before this platform, one had to use our own means to communicate with the user community through Facebook or through relationship buildings. So now we have another source to reach out. But of course, before you reach out to your community, you really need to do diligence on your product or service. Very important to know where your product or service fits into the existing community. Is there a product or service like yours? Have you tested out the likeliness of success for your product or service? So there's a lot of background information that you really need to do before you get ready to launch.
Yeah, test it with your family and friends. Those are your best guinea pigs usually.
You know, family or friends are our go-to community, not only for testing, but a lot of times for funding. And if you ask entrepreneurs who are starting out where they received their initial funding, it wasn't from investors. It was from their own pocket, their own credit card, or family and friends. And this is a common way entrepreneurs start off to develop their product. So when you're ready to launch your service or your product, you really have to have some skin in the game. You have to believe in your product enough that you're willing to take on some risk. Taking on some risk means investing your own money. So when it comes down to investing your own money, one becomes very, very cautious and very careful. And of course, investors will also feel that way too.
So I just wanted to show this company. Again, the founder is a professor at the art school here in San Francisco. I always forget the...
Art Institute?
It's not Art Institute, it's the other one. It's not Academy of Art, California College of the Arts. CCA, yeah, that's the one. And yeah, so here you have the guy doing a test drive, I think. Maybe we'll just play one of these videos. I don't think you need to hear the sound. Oh, here we go.
The first wheelie on that shit I've ever seen. Did you get that on video? Can I get you to do a wheelie?
So this is as a result of them posting some images on Facebook and somebody commenting that they want to try it out. So he noticed that the individual who commented was SF Base, and he announced a test ride one of these evenings down here in the dog patch area.
Whoa, you did the first wheelie on that shit I've ever seen. Did you get that on video? Can I get you to do a wheelie like on video? On video? Not right now, but later on. Can I ride it? Oh fuck, that's a Venus wheelie!
Sorry about the language.
So what's your thought? What do you think?
Oh, it's fucking awesome, bro. Fucking, mate, fucking legit. Like, it's got so much fucking torque. Like, I wasn't expecting it. It like wound up fucking hard. And like this, fuck purring, mate, purring on that back wheel. Oh my god, fucking epic.
I should have checked this video before I played it for you guys. But you can tell how excited he is, right? That's the kind of emotional response you want to get from people before you bring that idea to consumers and you start raising funding from it. Because this is really genuine feedback, and this guy's not being paid to say this either. This is really genuine emotional response from trying out the product itself. I also wanted to show their website. So visually stunning website, right? Really great images, really good branding as well, and it's all very consistent. And this is all everything that you can do for free on your own. If you have skilled friends who are web designers, this doesn't cost a lot of money. You can actually just do it just by starting a Squarespace or one of those Wix sites. Let me see if I can get a video going here because their videos are great. Oh, here we go. So this is the type of video that they produce for the actual launch of the campaign to bridge that gap between the product and the consumer. And then finally, I just wanted to quickly show their Indiegogo campaign page. This is where everything comes together, right? The videos up here, the offerings that he's providing for those perks in return for the funds are on the right-hand side. So you can see that there are multiple different tiers in pricing. And that's where the exclusivity and discounts come in. You want to create multiple tiers of discounts so that the first comers of the campaign page itself, the first contributors, are going to get the biggest discount. They feel much better, and they will contribute quicker because of that. One thing I also wanted to point out up here is this dirt bike kit. This was created as a stretch goal. So initially, the campaign goal was around $200,000. Actually, not 200,000. I think it's much lower than that. 264. It was around $100,000. And they were able to reach that fairly quickly on the basis of sales of this bike itself. And then they announced that if everybody shared the campaign with their friends, family members, and altogether we raised $200,000, we're going to unlock this new kit so that you can contribute to it and get a dirt bike kit. So that's a way for you to extend the momentum of the campaign and create those artificial bumps in momentum and contributions. And then one other thing I also wanted to show, third-party validators. All of the press that he got from pitching the media. Uncrate is a really great one for men's products. Electrek, so he did his own work here. This is probably the #1 blog when it comes to electric vehicle transport. So he did his research, what kind of blogs, where are his consumers reading information from? So blogs like this, Gear Patrol. So keep in mind, media as a third-party validator is a really important asset. Alrighty, I think those are all the things that I wanted to share with you today. Any last-minute questions? Yes?
Did they do this in-house or outsourced to agency?
This was actually mostly in-house. Again, the founder is a professor at CCA, so he had a lot of creative friends. He himself was a videographer, so he took his prototype, a couple other guys, all the way to Moab, Utah, and had a whole week of just getting footage.
Did this one for 30 days or longer?
This one ran for 60 days, and it actually currently is in demand. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 3 phases to the Indiegogo platform, starting with crowdfunding, in-demand, and marketplace. So once your crowdfunding campaign is over and you've reached your goal, you can continue to sell your product on in-demand, and this is currently live and available.
Do you think 30 days or 60 days is better, or what?
It's a good question. So I typically recommend campaigners set their goal as a 30-day goal when they open up the campaign. And on the 3rd week, we'll reassess how the campaign is doing. Typically, I always recommend to extend all the way to 60 days and then make an update saying that, hey, to your consumers, we've seen a lot of demand. We know a lot of people want to buy this product, so we're going to extend it for another 30 days. So you get a chance to do so. Your friends get the chance to do so. Maybe if you extend it for another 30 days, that's when you create a referral contest, where if you share the product and somebody buys it, you may get a little something bonus for free. Yep.
Yes, my question was like that. How can we want to funding if you want to create one product? Zero time, like you want to first produce one product.
Yes.
In the beginning, but
you have 0 funding.
yeah, and you don't have anything, and you want to start at the beginning.
Yeah. So I think we're going before crowdfunding even starts, and how do you actually create your first prototype? That's going to have to come in either from your own personal investment or your friends and family, because they're your first advocates, right? You create that first prototype. As Susan mentioned, when it comes to R&D here in San Francisco, we have a lot of outlets up in San Francisco that can help you with prototyping, 3D printing shops. CNC's workshops. They're all available for you to use to create at least a viable looks-like prototype that you can go out to the market with. But that first prototype has to come from your own funds.
Yes, I can look, for example, for something more involve the technology, like a little bit of the computers and a little bit of other stuff, and they kind of together. And those don't, with those things, you just be like a modeling it. Of course, I can use others to picture it, but for producing some stuff like a special, like not simple like a bike, but a little bit more specific required stuff, need to more work on it, and that's not easily you can do it as my own, because those at least could require at least $1 million.
Yeah, yeah.
For that stuff, if you have that things, how you can do that?
Yeah, so I think you're asking about how do you approach big-time investors to fund more complicated ideas like that. And that's a little tough to answer because it's almost a chicken and the egg problem, because the investor is going to want to find proof for it to be worth it for them to invest in that idea.
You can find those people, like, and how do you, for example, is it like a university, like I know universities.
Yes, so you can find those individuals at VC events. So if you do a little bit of research on the internet, if it's a hardware-related product, Bolt, B-O-L-T, is a really big one up in the Embarcadero. Their headquarters is in Boston, but they have a satellite office here at the Autodesk office. Really great shop, by the way, about $20 million worth of machines in there just to create prototypes. And that would be your first stepping stone.
What's the name of it?
Bolt, B-O-L-T-I-O. Bolt.io, B-O-L-T.io. And those are the kind of, they do a lot of investor events where they hold these events with a lot of investors, with a lot of entrepreneurs, where entrepreneurs can show ideas to investors, vice versa.
You know, one of my students came up with a very interesting idea, and he connected with investors at meetups. Has anyone gone to any meetups here in this room? This is a great opportunity to meet like-minded members of the community as well as investors. Do you remember the meetup that you went to?
I'm doing entrepreneurship in a different kind of way. Like I am doing more of a business owner thing where I'm, I guess, a salesperson, but for my own existing product. Almost as, so I'm a New York Life agent, so I work with their products. They help me out. But I joined a meetup group of a bunch of different business owners of all kinds, and basically we all have each other's business cards, and we're all a bunch of referrals to bring people in, whether it's an investor, a person to buy the product, whatever.
So that is a really good place to start with an idea, is to get out into the community and find other people who have similar interests to you. And then also in that community there are angel investors. And we can talk about, there's different kinds of investors. There's the VCs and there's just angel investors. And then there are other investors who are smaller than the angel investors. And these investors you'll find on crowdfunding platforms and in meetups. They're interested in supporting an idea and being on the ground floor. But the main thing to emphasize about being an entrepreneur is to get out into the community and not operate in a vacuum. That's a very limiting condition where you don't have contact with people out in the community who are doing similar things. Because every relationship you build out in the community will result in multiple relationships. You may know someone who knows a guy who knows a guy, and through those connections you will find success. This is entrepreneurship is a relationship building type of operation where the more people in your community, the more likely you will find success, and we will find the assistance for your success.
Thank you.
So,
yeah. And just wanted to add as a resource, this is a good stepping stone into the hardware community in San Francisco. It's a really large community called Hardware Massive. This is their website. If you look up Hardware Massive events on meetup.com, you'll find their happy hours. You get to go have a drink for free and talk hardware with people in the industry. And 3 other VCs that focus in hardware. Lemnos, this is based in Dogpatch. They helped launch a tea brewing device called Tiforia with me, actually. It was a lot of fun. Bolt, these guys actually were the guys behind Tonal, which is the Peloton for weight training. And then Playground Global, Andy Rubin's VC based in Palo Alto. Andy Rubin's the creator of Android. So here's another hardware VC that is located here in the Bay Area. And they all do events. One last thing I wanted to note, CES is coming up in January. If you want to look at a lot of ideas in terms of the tech industry, what has come out, and just talk to many different entrepreneurs and get their thoughts into your product and how they were able to be successful, that's a really good place to go and share your ideas. We'll be there too, by the way. So.
That's super. So yeah, that's such a great heads up, is to be part of the community that you want to be a leader in. You don't want to do it from your desktop. You want to really get out there and meet people, and that way your idea gets refined and your opportunities get enlarged. Very important.
I think one last question.
Yeah, and there's also a free venture capitalist. You can go to all government agencies, and all government agencies has the thing called Small Business Incubation Research, or the STPR.
That's awesome.
They have inventions right in their
Do you know where they're based in?
They're all based all over the USA.
Cool.
I think we need a resource page
Yeah.
based on this conversation.
Yeah, is that a good
And
idea?
thank you back there for your question, because we really want to make sure you feel that you have access to all these ideas that have come up.
So we are, I'm sorry, Susan. So one of the things I wanted to mention that we are developing a resource page. So those of you that are attending that you know links, websites, agencies, organizations, send it over. You have entrepreneurship website, right? Email address, send it to us. We're going to start a link over there, and we're going to post all our speakers' information if they allow us their contact information. So you guys are more than welcome to reach out.
And also, community colleges, they all have their own resources. Your San Mateo Community College is good for import-export.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Some of your best resources are the people sitting next to you right now. Yeah. Yep.
Is there any restriction on products, like for example, medical cannabis?
So we don't allow cannabis products. We're very sensitive about that. CBD products we actually do allow, but not THC products. There is a whole terms of use on our website that goes into more details, but weapons, obviously, we do not allow. When it comes to medical products, we do allow them, but for your own best interest, you want to get FDA approval before you actually launch the product. Because having FDA approval is just going to bring you a step higher than the rest of the companies that don't. Yeah.
Is it like advice to maybe, you know how you're saying, to get involved in the community, maybe do volunteer work too, or is that seem?
Absolutely. Absolutely. These meetups, they always require volunteers, you know, to check people in, and can always stick around. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the game is to build relationships, because people know people that you are going to want to know, and you want to jump in any way you can. Going to the meetups, volunteering is a great idea, because then you're part of an insider track.
And I would say, to add to that, I would never discount any relationship. Make sure you keep having that relationship in the future, because you never know when that's going to come into a useful time. Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for having patience to show your video.
Oh, yeah, no
Because
worries.
everyone knows that a picture is worth a million words. And when we see a video, it's extremely compelling. And so I tell my students, when they launch their websites, insert videos. That really puts a very direct connection to the viewer and whatever's being viewed. And by the way, you can launch a website quite easily on your own using Wix. Not a commercial for Wix, but there are other WordPress, there's other websites that you can use, and where you can import videos, import pictures, voiceover. There's a lot of tools now for you to create a really strong business prototype without bringing in the experts to write specialty websites.
Here at the community college, like she says.
Yeah.
One other thing I do want to end with is, let's just ask. So when you guys are funding, what are you looking for?
We look for, that's a really good question, thank you. We look for your community, how big your email list is, and we compare that to your actual funding goal. So let's just go for an example. You're trying to raise $1 million for a $100 product. That means that you need to sell 10,000 units of that product. And not to scare you, but your email list typically on average only converts at a 5% rate. So for you to be confident that your email list will produce those 10,000 units in sales, you actually have to build a 200,000 email list. That's for a $100 product, $1 million goal. Now, there are many shortcuts to that $200,000 number outside of the actual community building that you're doing on social media. Influencers, people who have millions of followers on Instagram, if they can be ambassadors of your product and share that product within their own community, that's an easy way for you to get high up to those numbers that you need. So community size is one. what's your budget for advertising as well? So you do want to have a healthy enough budget because you want to push the advertising. Again, you're not investing all of that up front, only when you know it's performing well. Those are the two big ones. We can typically determine how successful you're going to be by the size of your community.
What percentage do you take?
We take a 5% fee for any funds that are raised on the Indiegogo platform. That's just our standard fee for running a campaign on the platform. Now, if your campaign is doing particularly well, what I mean by that, it's raising upwards of $150,000, then there are opportunities where we promote your campaign within our own Indiegogo community. We have millions of backers that come from all over the world. In fact, 40% of all our transactions go across the border. So there are a lot of international consumers as well as campaigners that are on the platform. And we provide more opportunities for promotions if your campaign is converting well within those communities.
And do you give feedback? So let's just say, you know,
yes.
my lid.
Yes. So my email is enzo@indiegogo.com. If anybody has ever any questions or just want to chat about your ideas, get some feedback on those pitches, feel free to reach out. If you are interested in launching a campaign on Indiegogo, preferably reach out to me around 4 to 6 months before you decide on launching that. And then we can work together on a more detailed rough draft of your timeline. We can provide you with references to any individual that you need to help you build your campaign. Trust the community around you at first, but if you need other resources outside of that, videographers, PR representatives, advertising experts, we have the resources that we can provide you with for those as well. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a good evening. Sweet.
So I want to leave a certain amount of time for you to do the workshop exercise, which is to ideate a product and use the Canvas business model. But before we do this, I just want to go through a high-level view of entrepreneurship so that you have this larger picture of where you're going. So the first thing is basically is innovation. This is where you have to innovate a product and a triggering event. So this is, by looking at this overall map, will help you understand really where you're going. Because there is a saying, if you cannot see your target, you don't know where you're going. So if your ultimate idea is implementation and growth, you want to see your work toward this effort. And the idea is a triggering event may happen which will help your innovative idea get implemented. So we heard from speakers earlier in this program where they came from another country and they had a need to develop a business for their survival. So remember, survival is a real instigator of entrepreneurship. When you need to survive, you need to come up with an idea for your survival, and sometimes an innovative product will capture that need. So the speakers we had from abroad, from Senegal and from South Korea, had this need, and they decided to use the food products from their home country and introduce it into the United States. So that was a triggering event that helped them implement this idea. Necessity being the mother of invention, that pushed them along through these stages of implementation and growth. That is another idea, is some idea that you may come up with, like a travel idea, and you're very passionate about it. I have some further ideas of some services you could attach to your travel idea that makes it unique. A product or service really needs to be unique. So you just don't want to launch an idea that's already been out there. You want to cast it in some very unique way. And usually what will really promote it is your passion about this particular product or service, either a need or a passion. So we're going to look at your needs and passion when we use this Canvas business model in a moment. Personal attributes. These are factors that will influence you as an entrepreneur. You want to make sure you kind of reflect on these as you work on your progress. Do you have a desire for financial success? Do you have a desire for self-realization? Do you have a desire for recognition? Do you have a joy for innovation? And are you able to tolerate a little risk? So when we talked about investing your own money and the money of your family and friends, that means you're taking a little risk. And what are the local environmental factors? We mentioned here in the Bay Area, a lot of us are of entrepreneurial mindset. We are open to change. We are not committed to how things are done in the past. We're willing to disrupt the past and come up with a new idea. So we are in that environment that entrepreneurship is possible. And we're in that culture that's possible. And the other question is, what about your family? Some of you are married and have children. You really have to assess the risk that you're taking on as being an entrepreneur when you have certain responsibilities. So very briefly, these are components of success. You need resources, you need an opportunity, and you need you, the entrepreneur, you are the important ingredient in this whole mix. You are the one who's willing to work and those long nights. You are the person that's willing to put themselves out and go to meetups and start building your social network. Very important to build your social network. We heard from Indiegogo. They require a list of, what is it, 200, how many thousand contacts in your Facebook account? You need to build up your social network because you need to create a community in which to pitch your ideas. So these are things that you really have to consider: your financial reality, your contacts in your network, and always to reach out for advice and feedback. So we talk just a little bit about how you get money. How do you get money for your ideas? From your family or your friends? You either take their money and say, I will pay you back, or you say, if you give me your money, I will allow you to share some of the equity in my company. So equity sharing, we see that on Shark Tank all the time. They'll give people money, but they want equity. So you have to decide how you want to play that, if you want to give away your company or take on debt. So once again, this is another idea of how you visualize the opportunity. You see yourself, you see the competition, you see the market. This is a very, very important part of entrepreneurship, and I always stress this. This is the due diligence part of the whole process. You really have to be a realist. You cannot approach entrepreneurship with blinders and say, I have the best idea and I'm going to go for it, and I'm just going to work hard and just go for it. No, you have to see how your idea fits in the context of the marketplace and the competition. Please do not spend endless hours pursuing an idea unless you consider the market and your competition. Resources, your personality, your time, your experience, your energy, your passion. Some people have more passion than they have time. Some people have more energy than they have personality, and so forth. But these all add together to create a huge resource for you as an entrepreneur. And then there's idea multiplication. So we talk about an entrepreneur. You have an idea. You have a great idea, but you act small. You take that idea and you test it out in some focus group. You don't take your idea and go large right away, because that puts you at risk for failing. If you go small and you get feedback, you can adjust your idea and so that it can multiply, and it really optimizes that idea. So this is just basically an iteration for idea multiplication developed by a company here in Palo Alto. I think this is a very good slide. gather stimuli, multiply stimuli, create concepts based on the feedback, and then optimize. So you have an idea, you have idea multiplication, and then you have a viable idea. This is a very, very important step. Idea multiplication, I sort of feel I'm repeating this, but you definitely want to take your idea and get feedback. You have to see how your idea plays out when other people hear it, when other people use it, because in that way you will get a sense of how the market is going to respond to your opportunity. So here's an S-curve. This is basically, this is a curve from biomimicry by how nature works. There's a beginning, there's a growth, and then there's a saturation. Just like in nature, plants, animals are born, they grow, and they mature. And so this is the nature of how your opportunity is going to play out, and this is where you're going to want to be most active in the growth part of the opportunity. Okay, the founding team, it's a team, if whoever you align with in your team is very important. It's a team sport. You cannot do things alone. This is the kind of world we live in. You need to have a partner, and today you'll have a partner. Obviously, you have advantage of a team, you have feedback, you have increased skill set with your teams, you have moral support, you have a capacity for more innovation if you have two heads or better than one kind of concept, and then you have a higher level of social support. So you have your own social network, they have their social network, and together you have a larger network. You have to consider what your role is in the company, what your strengths are in the company, and how to build a powerful team. These are thoughts that you really want to consider early on. Who do you want on your team? And resources, founders, employees. Most people have a flat team where everyone has a voice, but eventually you will probably want to have employees that do certain kind of lower level work for you, pass out flyers, promote on social media. So in addition to having a team, you're going to have external team members. So we were talking about learning about accounting, learning about business law, learning about software. You don't need to be an expert at all these, but as we heard, it's good to be familiar with how these particular subjects translate into the entrepreneurial role, because these people who you are going to designate as your experts will be part of your virtual team. They won't be part of your everyday team, but you really need to know how they roll. So if you're having accountants do your accounting for you, you have to have a basic understanding how that works, how profit and loss works, how cash flow works, in order to manage them. So you as the entrepreneur are sort of a manager on steroids. You're a manager with a vision, but unless and it's a very difficult job at first to be a manager and a visionary, but because you don't have the resources, you really have to do both. And in order to effectively do both, you really have to understand what you need to manage. What are the problems faced with startups and business teams? Burnout. It's so much work, there's so much involved, people get burned out. So you really have to pace yourself. Family pressure. Family pressure, you're taking too much time doing your project away from the family. We need you. And here's the other one, is interpersonal conflicts. Within a team, this is a really deal breaker where people just can't get along. And that's a real issue in general. In business in general, people can't get along. So somehow when you choose your founding team, you have to choose people that you can logically work with. So just as a recap, entrepreneurship is a team sport. You need to determine who will be on the team, and you have to create a culture that the team can focus on. So remember, you are the entrepreneur with the vision, and you're also the manager. So as a manager, you have to really create a very positive, upbeat culture for your team members to work in, because this environment helps promote your product or service. And maintaining this team is an ongoing effort. So you as an entrepreneur can't just launch an idea and expect it to go on automatic pilot. You have to be part of the whole process of managing that idea. So that's a big role, and that's why we have a lot of burnout. I like to sort of stop my slideshow right now, because I really want you to have an experience of using some of these models that I've brought with me. And so I'd like to ask you to form a team of 2 people, perhaps, and we can just walk through this model and see if you can ideate a product or service in a very short time. Some of you have come to class already with an idea, and that's great. So, but what I'd like you to do is get a little practice in using the business model, and then after we go through that model, we're going to go through the pitch deck that we're going to ask you to prepare for the next module.